The fluorescent lights of the military recruitment office buzzed overhead as Sarah Martinez straightened her uniform and checked her reflection one last time. At 23, she had worked harder than most people twice her age to earn her place at Fort Braxton's prestigious Special Operations Training Command. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her boots polished to mirror shine, and her uniform pressed to perfection. Everything looked exactly as it should for a soldier reporting to her first day at the most demanding military training facility in the country. Sarah took a deep breath and walked through the glass doors of the administrative building. The smell of fresh coffee and copy machine toner filled the air as she approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her computer screen. "You must be Sergeant Martinez," the receptionist said with a warm smile. "Welcome to Fort Braxton. Colonel Davidson is expecting you in conference room B just down the hall, second door on your left." Sarah nodded her thanks and walked down the polished linoleum hallway, her boots making soft clicking sounds with each step. The walls were lined with photographs of distinguished military personnel and framed certificates of achievement. As she passed each image, she felt a surge of pride knowing she was now part of this elite community. She paused outside conference room B and knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. "Enter," came a firm voice from inside. Sarah opened the door and stepped into a spacious conference room with a long mahogany table surrounded by black leather chairs. At the head of the table sat Colonel Robert Davidson, a man in his early 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail at once. His uniform displayed numerous ribbons and medals, each one representing years of dedicated service and exceptional achievement. "Sergeant Martinez, please have a seat," Colonel Davidson said, gesturing to a chair halfway down the table. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Sarah sat down and placed her hands neatly on the table in front of her. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here." The colonel opened a thick manila folder and began reviewing her file. "Your record is impressive, Sergeant. Top of your class at basic training, excellent marks in advanced weapons training, and outstanding performance reviews from your commanding officers. You've earned your place here through hard work and dedication." "Thank you, sir. I've always believed that actions speak louder than words." Colonel Davidson smiled slightly. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we need here. Now I want you to know that the training you'll undergo in the coming months will push you beyond anything you've experienced before. It's designed to test not just your physical abilities, but your mental strength, your problem-solving skills, and your ability to work as part of a team under the most challenging circumstances." Sarah nodded. "I understand, sir. I'm ready for whatever challenges lie ahead." "I'm sure you are," the colonel said, closing her file. "Your training begins tomorrow at 500 hours. Today, I want you to get familiar with the facility, meet some of your fellow trainees, and settle into your quarters. Corporal Williams will show you around." As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. A young man with short blonde hair and a friendly face entered the room. "Corporal Williams, this is Sergeant Martinez. Please give her the full tour and introduce her to the other members of her training cohort." "Yes, sir," Corporal Williams replied with a crisp salute. "Sergeant Martinez, if you'll follow me, we'll start with the barracks and then move on to the training facilities." Sarah stood and saluted Colonel Davidson. "Thank you for your time, sir." "Welcome to Fort Braxton, Sergeant. I have a feeling you're going to do very well here." As they left the conference room, Corporal Williams began explaining the layout of the base. "The facility is divided into several sections," he said as they walked down another corridor. "Administrative offices are here in Building A, barracks are in Buildings B and C, training facilities are in the complex behind us, and the dining hall and recreation areas are in Building D." They pushed through a set of double doors and emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight. The base was larger than Sarah had expected, with multiple buildings connected by well-maintained walkways and green spaces. Soldiers of various ranks moved purposefully between buildings, some in training gear, others in dress uniforms. "Your cohort has 12 members," Corporal Williams continued as they walked toward the barracks. "Everyone comes from different backgrounds and specialties, but you all have one thing in common. You've proven yourselves exceptional in your previous assignments." They entered Building B through a side door and walked down a hallway lined with individual rooms. "This will be your room," he said, stopping in front of a door with a small nameplate that read SGT, Martinez. You'll have about an hour to get settled before dinner. The dining hall opens at 1800 hours. Sarah's room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, desk, dresser, and small closet. Her duffel bags had already been delivered and were sitting on the bed. She thanked Corporal Williams and began unpacking her belongings. As she hung her uniforms in the closet, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in a working-class family in Texas, she had always felt the need to prove herself. Her father worked 2 jobs to support the family, and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Education was important to her parents, but military service offered Sarah a path to college and a career that would make them proud. She had enlisted immediately after high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and create a better life for herself and her family. Basic training had been challenging, but she had excelled through determination and an unwillingness to give up. Advanced training had been even more demanding, but she had continued to push herself, always striving to be better than she was the day before. Now, at Fort Braxton, she was surrounded by the best of the best. Everyone here had earned their place through exceptional performance and dedication. Sarah knew she would have to work harder than ever to prove she belonged among such an elite group. After unpacking, she decided to explore the base a bit more before dinner. She walked through the training complex, observing obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and specialized equipment she didn't recognize. Everything was state-of-the-art and meticulously maintained. As she made her way toward the dining hall, she encountered a group of soldiers sitting on a bench outside Building D. They appeared to be members of her training cohort, based on their age and the casual way they were talking together. "You must be the new arrival," said a tall man with dark hair and a confident demeanor. "I'm Jake Thompson, formerly with the 82nd Airborne." "Sarah Martinez," she replied, extending her hand, "previously stationed at Fort Hood." The group introduced themselves one by one. There was Maria Santos from the Military Police Corps, David Chen from Army Intelligence, Lisa Johnson, who had served with a medical unit in Afghanistan, and several others whose names and backgrounds blurred together in Sarah's mind. "So what's your story, Martinez?" asked Thompson, leaning back on the bench. "What makes you think you've got what it takes for special ops training?" Sarah bristled slightly at the challenging tone, but kept her voice steady. "Same thing that brought all of us here, I imagine. A desire to serve at the highest level and the skills to back it up." Thompson smirked. "We'll see about that. This isn't like regular Army training. A lot of people wash out in the first week." Before Sarah could respond, Maria Santos spoke up. "Give it a rest, Jake. We're all here for the same reason. No point in starting drama before training even begins." Thompson shrugged but didn't pursue the conversation further. The group began discussing what they expected from the training program, sharing stories from their previous assignments, and speculating about their instructors. As they talked, Sarah noticed that several members of the group kept glancing at her arms. She was wearing her standard short-sleeved uniform shirt, which revealed a portion of an intricate tattoo that wrapped around her right forearm. The design featured delicate cherry blossoms intertwined with military insignia, creating a beautiful blend of feminine artistry and martial symbolism. "Nice ink," said David Chen, nodding toward her arm. "What's the story behind it?" Sarah looked down at her tattoo, a slight smile crossing her face. "It's a reminder of where I come from and where I'm going. The cherry blossoms represent the Japanese side of my grandmother's heritage, and the military elements represent my commitment to service." "Looks expensive," Thompson commented with a slight edge to his voice. "Must be nice to have money to spend on fancy artwork." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I saved for months to have it done by a reputable artist. It means something to me." "I'm sure it does," Thompson replied, his tone suggesting he thought otherwise. "I just hope it doesn't distract you when things get serious. Some people think looking tough is the same as being tough." The comment stung, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with skepticism and prejudice before, often from people who made assumptions about her based on her appearance, her background, or her gender. She had learned that the best response was always to let her performance speak for itself. "I think we should probably head in for dinner," Maria Santos suggested, clearly sensing the tension in the group. "Big day tomorrow." The dining hall was spacious and well-appointed, with long tables that could accommodate large groups. The food was better than Sarah had expected, and she found herself sitting with Maria and Lisa Johnson, who were more welcoming than some of the others in their cohort. "Don't let Jake get to you," Maria said quietly as they ate. "He's got a chip on his shoulder about something, probably feels like he has to prove he's the alpha male of the group." "I can handle it," Sarah replied. "I've dealt with worse." "I'm sure you have," Lisa added. "It's tough being a woman in the military sometimes, especially in specialized units. But if you made it this far, you've obviously got what it takes." After dinner, Sarah returned to her room and spent the evening reviewing training manuals and preparing her gear for the next day. She set her alarm for 4:30 hours, giving herself enough time to complete her morning routine before the 500 start time. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, Sarah thought about the challenges that lay ahead. She knew the training would be physically and mentally demanding, but she also knew that some of her biggest obstacles might come from within her own cohort. Thompson's attitude suggested that not everyone was ready to accept her as an equal, and she would have to prove herself not just to the instructors, but to her fellow trainees as well. But Sarah had faced skepticism before, and she had always responded the same way through hard work, determination, and unwavering focus on her goals. She closed her eyes and tried to get some rest, knowing that tomorrow would be the beginning of the most challenging period of her military career. The alarm buzzed at 4:30, jolting Sarah from a restless sleep. She quickly showered, dressed in her PT gear, and made her way to the designated assembly area behind the training complex. The morning air was crisp and cool, with a hint of moisture that suggested rain might be coming later in the day. Her fellow trainees were already gathering in formation, looking alert despite the early hour. Sarah took her place in line and waited for their instructors to arrive. At exactly 500 hours, 3 men in combat fatigues approached the formation. The lead instructor was an imposing figure with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in the military. His uniform displayed the rank of Master Sergeant, and his name tape read RODRIGUEZ. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Master Sergeant Rodriguez said in a voice that carried easily across the assembly area. "Welcome to Special Operations Training Command. For the next 16 weeks, this facility will be your home, your workplace, and your proving ground. Some of you will graduate and go on to serve in elite units around the world. Others will find that they are not suited for this level of training and will return to their previous assignments." He began walking slowly in front of the formation, making eye contact with each trainee as he passed. "The training you will undergo is designed to push you beyond your perceived limitations. You will be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally. You will be required to work as part of a team while also demonstrating individual excellence. You will face challenges that will seem impossible, and you will either find a way to overcome them or you will fail." When Master Sergeant Rodriguez stopped in front of Sarah, she could feel his intense gaze evaluating her. She kept her eyes straight ahead and her expression neutral, just as she had been trained to do. "The standards here are the same for everyone," he continued, moving on to the next person in line. "There are no special considerations, no accommodations, and no excuses. You will either meet the standards or you will not. It's that simple." He returned to the front of the formation and looked out over the group. "Your first exercise will be a 10-mile run followed by an obstacle course. This will serve as a baseline assessment of your current fitness level. Instructor Williams will lead the run. Fall out and follow him." Corporal Williams, who Sarah had met the previous day, appeared from behind the group and began jogging toward a trail that led into the wooded area surrounding the base. The trainees fell in behind him in a loose formation. The pace was challenging but not impossible, and Sarah found herself running comfortably in the middle of the group. She had always been a strong runner, and the early morning miles had been part of her routine for years. As they moved through the forest, she focused on her breathing and tried to assess the fitness levels of her fellow trainees. Thompson was running near the front of the group, clearly trying to establish himself as one of the stronger performers. Maria Santos was keeping a steady pace a few positions ahead of Sarah, while David Chen appeared to be struggling slightly with the pace. After about 5 miles, the trail began to climb steadily upward, and the run became more challenging. Several trainees began to fall back, their breathing becoming labored as they fought to maintain the pace. Sarah adjusted her stride and focused on maintaining her position in the group. By mile 8, the group had spread out considerably. Thompson and 2 other trainees had pulled ahead, while several others had fallen well behind. Sarah found herself running with Maria and another trainee named Marcus Williams, a former Marine who had served multiple tours overseas. "How you holding up?" Marcus asked as they crested a particularly steep hill. "I'm good," Sarah replied, her breathing still controlled. "This is actually nice after being stuck behind a desk for the past few months." Maria laughed. "Speak for yourself. I'm starting to remember why I liked the MP duties that involved more sitting and less running." As they approached the final mile, Sarah could see the base facilities in the distance. The obstacle course was clearly visible behind the training complex, a series of walls, ropes, tunnels, and other challenges that would test their strength, agility, and problem-solving abilities. They finished the run as a group, with Thompson and his companions waiting at the finish line with smug expressions that suggested they thought they had proven something significant. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was standing nearby with a stopwatch and clipboard, recording times and making notes. "Not bad for a warm-up," he said as the last stragglers arrived. "Now let's see how you handle the obstacle course. You'll go through individually, and I'll be timing each run." The course record is currently held by Lieutenant Morrison, who completed it in 4 minutes and 37 seconds 2 years ago. Sarah studied the course as Rodriguez explained the rules. There were 12 obstacles of varying difficulty, including a 20-foot rope climb, a series of balance beams, a tunnel crawl, and several walls that required different climbing techniques. The key would be finding the most efficient path through each obstacle while maintaining speed and avoiding mistakes that would cost precious seconds. Thompson volunteered to go first, clearly wanting to set the tone for the group. He attacked the course aggressively, showing good upper body strength on the rope climb and moving quickly through the balance beams. However, his aggressive approach led to a costly mistake on the tunnel crawl, where he got briefly stuck and had to back out and restart. He finished with a time of 6 minutes and 18 seconds respectable, but not exceptional. Several other trainees followed, with times ranging from just under 6 minutes to over 8 minutes. Maria Santos turned in a solid performance at 6 minutes and 2 seconds, using technique and efficiency to compensate for any lack of raw strength. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the starting line with a clear plan in mind. She had watched each previous run carefully, noting where people had lost time and identifying the most efficient techniques for each obstacle. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant Martinez," Master Sergeant Rodriguez said, his finger poised over the stopwatch. Sarah exploded from the starting line and attacked the first obstacle, a series of hurdles that required precise timing and coordination. She cleared them smoothly and moved immediately to the rope climb, using a technique that combined her legs and arms to ascend quickly and efficiently. The balance beams required focus and controlled movement, and Sarah took her time to ensure she didn't make any costly mistakes. She could hear Thompson making comments to the other trainees as she moved through the course, but she blocked out the distractions and stayed focused on her performance. The tunnel crawl was where she had planned to make up time. Rather than rushing through blindly, she had observed that the most efficient technique was to move in a specific rhythm that allowed for maximum speed while avoiding getting stuck. She emerged from the tunnel well ahead of the pace she needed to beat Thompson's time. The wall climbs required different techniques, and Sarah used her knowledge of rock climbing to find the most efficient routes up each surface. Her smaller size actually worked to her advantage here, as she could use holds and techniques that wouldn't work for larger trainees. As she approached the final obstacle, a series of monkey bars that spanned a water pit, Sarah could see Master Sergeant Rodriguez watching intently. She grabbed the first bar and began moving hand over hand, maintaining a steady rhythm and fighting the fatigue that was beginning to build in her forearms. She reached the final platform and sprinted through the finish line, immediately looking to Rodriguez for her time. 5 minutes and 43 seconds, he announced, making a note on his clipboard. "Well done, Sergeant Martinez." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she realized she had turned in the second-best time of the day, beaten only by Marcus Williams, who had finished in 5 minutes and 39 seconds. More importantly, she had demonstrated to her fellow trainees that she belonged in their ranks. As she walked back to rejoin the group, she caught Thompson staring at her with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. His assumption that she would struggle with the physical challenges had been proven wrong, and she could tell he didn't like being proven wrong. "Nice run," Maria said as Sarah approached. "That rope climb was textbook perfect." Thanks, Sarah replied, still catching her breath. I've always enjoyed obstacle courses. They're like puzzles that you solve with your whole body. Master Sergeant Rodriguez called the group back together for a debrief of the morning's activities. He provided feedback on each performance, highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. When he reached Sarah's run, he was complimentary but focused on technical aspects rather than offering excessive praise. Sergeant Martinez demonstrated excellent course management and technique, he said. Her approach was methodical and efficient, which allowed her to maintain speed while avoiding costly mistakes. However, I noticed some hesitation on the balance beams that cost her several seconds. Confidence and commitment are just as important as technique. Sarah nodded, taking the feedback seriously. She knew that Master Sergeant Rodriguez was right. She had been overly cautious on the balance beams, and a more aggressive approach might have shaved additional time off her run. As the morning session concluded, the trainees were given 30 minutes to clean up and prepare for the afternoon training block. Sarah headed back to her room to shower and change into a fresh uniform. She was just finishing getting dressed when there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find David Chen standing in the hallway, looking slightly nervous. "Hey, Sarah, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" David stepped into her room and closed the door behind him. "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. I heard Thompson talking to a couple of the other guys after the obstacle course. He's pretty upset that you did so well, and he was making some comments about your tattoo again." Sarah's expression hardened. "What kind of comments?" "Stupid stuff, mostly. Saying that anyone who spends money on expensive tattoos probably comes from a privileged background and doesn't understand what real sacrifice means. He's also suggesting that people with visible tattoos are more concerned with their image than their performance." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Thanks for letting me know, David. I appreciate the heads up. For what it's worth, I think he's completely wrong. Your performance today spoke for itself. Just be careful around him. I get the feeling he's the type who might try to sabotage someone he sees as competition." After David left, Sarah sat on her bed and stared at her tattoo. The cherry blossoms and military insignia meant more to her than anyone in her cohort could possibly understand. The design represented her family's sacrifice, her grandmother's strength in the face of discrimination, and her own commitment to honor their legacy through her service. She had saved every spare dollar for 6 months to have the tattoo completed by Master Tanaka, an elderly Japanese-American artist who had served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team during World War II. Master Tanaka had shared stories of his unit's incredible bravery and the discrimination they had faced, both as Japanese-Americans and as soldiers trying to prove their loyalty to a country that had questioned their patriotism. The tattoo was a reminder that Sarah's commitment to service ran deeper than most people realized, and that she had overcome obstacles they couldn't imagine. But she also knew that explaining this to Thompson and others like him would be pointless. They had already made up their minds about who she was based on superficial observations. Sarah stood up and adjusted her uniform, preparing to head to the dining hall for lunch. She would let her performance continue to speak for itself, just as she always had. If Thompson wanted to make assumptions about her based on her tattoo or anything else, that was his problem. She had more important things to focus on, like proving she belonged among the elite soldiers at Fort Braxton. 3 weeks into training at Fort Braxton, Sarah had established herself as one of the most consistent performers in her cohort. The daily routine was grueling physical training at dawn, weapons proficiency in the morning, tactical exercises in the afternoon, and classroom instruction in the evening. Each day brought new challenges designed to test different aspects of their military skills and mental toughness. Despite her strong performance, Sarah could feel the tension building within the group. Jake Thompson had emerged as an informal leader among several of the male trainees, and his attitude towards Sarah had grown increasingly hostile. What had started as subtle comments about her tattoo had evolved into a pattern of undermining behavior that was becoming harder to ignore. During weapons training that morning, Master Sergeant Rodriguez had assigned pairs for a marksmanship competition. Each team would engage targets at varying distances using different weapon systems, with points awarded based on accuracy and speed. Sarah found herself partnered with Lisa Johnson, the former medical unit soldier who had proven to be both skilled and reliable. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, Master Sergeant Rodriguez announced as the trainees assembled at the firing range. Today's exercise will test your ability to adapt to different weapons platforms under time pressure. Each team will rotate through 5 stations: pistol, rifle, shotgun, sniper rifle, and machine gun. You'll have 10 minutes at each station to engage as many targets as possible. Sarah and Lisa took their positions at the first station, where a selection of military-issue pistols waited on the shooting bench. The range featured targets at distances from 15 to 50 meters, each marked with different point values based on difficulty. "You take the closer targets, I'll focus on the longer range shots," Lisa suggested as she picked up a Beretta M9. Sarah nodded and selected a similar pistol, quickly checking the weapon and loading a fresh magazine. The range safety officer gave the command to commence firing, and both women began engaging their designated targets. Sarah's training and natural ability served her well. She moved smoothly between targets, her shots finding their marks with consistent precision. Beside her, Lisa was equally focused, taking carefully aimed shots at the more distant targets that required greater accuracy. At the rifle station, they maintained their efficient partnership, with Sarah handling rapid-fire sequences while Lisa focused on precision shots. Their teamwork and individual skills were producing one of the highest point totals of the day. From across the range, Sarah could hear Thompson's team struggling with their coordination. Thompson was trying to dominate both the close and long-range shooting, leaving his partner with little opportunity to contribute. Their point total was falling behind several other teams. "Looking good, Martinez," called Instructor Williams as he walked past their position. "Keep up the steady pace and you'll be hard to beat." The sniper rifle station presented the greatest challenge, requiring extreme precision at distances up to 800 meters. Lisa had experience with long-range weapons from her deployment, and she took the lead while Sarah served as her spotter. "Target at 600 meters, slight wind from the left," Sarah reported, watching through high-powered binoculars. Lisa made minute adjustments to her scope and squeezed the trigger. The distant target snapped backward, indicating a direct hit. "Perfect shot," Sarah confirmed. "Next target at 750 meters. They worked through the sequence methodically, with Lisa's experience and Sarah's precise spotting combining to produce consistently accurate results. By the time they moved to the machine gun station, they had built a commanding lead in the overall competition. The machine gun required different skills entirely: the ability to control automatic fire while engaging multiple targets in sequence. Sarah took the gunner position while Lisa fed ammunition and called out priority targets. The weight of the weapon and the recoil from sustained fire tested Sarah's physical strength, but her extensive conditioning training had prepared her well. She walked her fire across a line of targets, maintaining control of the weapon despite its tendency to climb and drift. When the exercise concluded, Master Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the teams to announce the results. In first place with a total of 847 points, Sergeant Martinez and Sergeant Johnson, he announced. "Outstanding teamwork and consistent accuracy across all weapons platforms." Sarah felt a surge of pride as she and Lisa exchanged congratulations. Their partnership had worked perfectly, with each of them contributing their strengths to achieve a result neither could have accomplished alone. Thompson's team had finished in 5th place out of 8 teams, and Sarah could see the frustration on his face as Rodriguez continued reading the results. When the announcement was finished and the groups began cleaning their weapons, Thompson approached Sarah's shooting position. "Not bad for someone who probably learned to shoot at some fancy private club," he said with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. "I learned to shoot on my uncle's ranch in Texas, starting when I was 8 years old. We hunted for food, not sport." "Right," Thompson replied skeptically. "I'm sure growing up with money made everything easier. Nice equipment, professional instruction, plenty of ammunition to practice with." Lisa Johnson stepped closer to Sarah, clearly sensing the tension. "Jake, what's your problem? Sarah just turned in one of the best shooting performances I've seen in years. Maybe instead of making excuses, you should focus on improving your own skills." Thompson's face reddened slightly. "I don't need advice from someone who spent her deployment treating paper cuts in a field hospital." "That's enough," Sarah said firmly, standing up and facing Thompson directly. If you have a problem with me, we can discuss it privately, but don't disrespect Lisa's service. She saved lives under fire, which is more than most people can say. For a moment, it looked like Thompson might escalate the confrontation, but Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared beside their group. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. "No problem, Master Sergeant," Thompson replied quickly. "Just discussing the day's training." Rodriguez looked at each of them carefully. "Good, because I'd hate to think that personal conflicts were interfering with unit cohesion. That would be grounds for removal from the program." After Rodriguez moved on, Thompson gave Sarah one more hostile look before walking away with his supporters. Lisa shook her head as she watched him leave. "That guy has serious issues," she said. "It's like he can't stand the fact that you're outperforming him." "I just wish he'd focus on his own training instead of trying to bring down everyone else," Sarah replied. That evening, Sarah was studying tactical manuals in her room when Maria Santos knocked on her door. Maria had become a close friend over the past few weeks, and Sarah welcomed the company. "How are you holding up?" Maria asked, settling into the desk chair across from Sarah's bed. "I'm doing fine. The training is challenging but manageable. It's the social dynamics that are wearing me down." Maria nodded knowingly. "Thompson's been making comments to anyone who will listen. He's convinced that you don't deserve to be here, and he's trying to get others to see things his way." "What kind of comments?" "The usual nonsense. Claims about your background, suggestions that you're getting special treatment, complaints about your tattoo being unprofessional. He's even suggested that you might be sleeping with one of the instructors to get favorable treatment." Sarah felt a flash of anger so intense it surprised her. "That's completely out of line." "I know, and most people aren't buying what he's selling. But he's got David Chen and Marcus Williams starting to question things. They don't necessarily agree with his more extreme comments, but they're beginning to wonder if there might be some truth to his claims about favoritism." Sarah closed her tactical manual and looked at Maria seriously. "What do you think I should do?" "Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Your performance speaks for itself. Eventually, even Thompson's supporters will have to acknowledge that you're earning everything through merit." "And if they don't?" Maria was quiet for a moment. "Then you'll have to decide whether it's worth fighting for your place here, or whether you'd rather transfer to a unit where you'll be judged solely on your abilities." The suggestion that she might have to leave Fort Braxton was deeply troubling to Sarah. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let Thompson's prejudices drive her away from her goals. But she also knew that training in a hostile environment could be dangerous, especially during the advanced exercises that lay ahead. The next morning brought their first major field exercise, a 3-day survival and evasion training that would test their ability to operate independently in hostile territory. The trainees were divided into 3 teams of 4, with each team responsible for reaching a designated extraction point while avoiding capture by opposing forces. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Thompson, David Chen, and Marcus Williams. The assignment was clearly intentional on the part of the instructors, who wanted to see how the group would function under stress despite their personal conflicts. Master Sergeant Rodriguez briefed them on the exercise parameters. Each team would be inserted into the training area with minimal equipment and would have 72 hours to reach their extraction point. Along the way, they would face various challenges designed to test their survival skills, tactical knowledge, and ability to work together under pressure. The opposing forces are composed of advanced trainees and instructors who know this terrain better than you do, Rodriguez explained. They will be actively hunting you, and if you're captured, you'll be subjected to interrogation and confinement exercises that will test your resistance training. Sarah's team was inserted by helicopter at dawn on Monday morning, deep in a mountainous training area that stretched for hundreds of square miles. As soon as they hit the ground, Thompson assumed leadership of the group without consulting the others. "All right, here's what we're going to do," he announced, spreading a topographic map on the ground. "We'll move in a straight line toward the extraction point, traveling at night and hiding during the day. Simple and direct." Sarah studied the map over his shoulder, immediately identifying several problems with his plan. "That route takes us through 3 major valley systems where we'll be completely exposed. We'd be better off following the ridge lines, even though it's longer." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Thompson replied without looking at her. I've got more experience with this type of mission than anyone else on the team. Actually, David Chen said hesitantly, Sarah might have a point. Those valleys look like natural choke points where opposing forces would set up ambushes. Thompson's jaw tightened. Are you seriously going to let someone with fancy tattoos and expensive gear tell you how to run a tactical mission? Marcus Williams had been studying the map quietly, and now he looked up with a troubled expression. Jake, Sarah's tactical scores have been higher than anyone else's in our cohort. Maybe we should at least consider her suggestions. Fine, Thompson said, his voice tight with frustration. Let's waste time debating every decision instead of moving toward our objective. I'm sure that won't get us captured. Despite his sarcasm, the group spent several minutes reviewing different route options. Eventually, they agreed on a compromise that incorporated some of Sarah's suggestions while still following Thompson's general timeline. As they began moving through the dense forest, Sarah took point while Thompson maintained his position as team leader. The terrain was challenging, with steep slopes and thick undergrowth that made silent movement difficult. After several hours of travel, they reached a ridge line that offered a clear view of the valley below. Sarah signaled for the team to stop and take cover while she observed the terrain ahead. Through her binoculars, she could see evidence of recent activity in the valley: boot prints, disturbed vegetation, and what looked like camouflaged observation posts on the opposite ridge. There's definitely opposition forces down there, she whispered as the others crawled up beside her position. I count at least 2 observation posts, and there are probably ground patrols we can't see. Thompson took the binoculars and studied the valley for several minutes. I don't see anything definitive. Those could just be training artifacts from previous exercises. Look at the tree line on the far ridge, Sarah insisted. There's a camouflage net about 400 meters to the left of that dead tree, and if you watch the shadows, you can see movement near the bottom of the valley. David Chen and Marcus Williams both took turns with the binoculars, and both confirmed Sarah's observations. Thompson was clearly frustrated that his initial assessment had been wrong, but he couldn't ignore the evidence. All right, so we go around, he said grudgingly, but this is going to add 6 hours to our travel time. Better than being captured on the first day, Sarah replied. They spent the rest of the day carefully circumnavigating the valley, moving slowly to avoid detection. Sarah's route selection proved accurate. They later discovered evidence of a major ambush position that had been set up exactly where Thompson had wanted to take the team. As evening approached, they found a defensible position where they could rest and plan their next day's movement. Thompson had grown increasingly sullen as the day progressed, clearly resentful that Sarah's tactical judgment had been superior to his own. I'll take first watch, Sarah volunteered as they prepared to settle in for the night. I don't think that's a good idea, Thompson said. Watch duty requires experience and judgment. Maybe you should get some rest while the real soldiers handle security. Marcus Williams looked uncomfortable with the comment. Come on, Jake. Sarah's proven she can handle responsibility, and her observation skills have been spot on today. Her observation skills? Thompson's voice was rising slightly. She's been second-guessing every decision I've made since we started this exercise. Maybe if she spent less time worrying about how her fancy tattoos look and more time focusing on following orders, we'd make better progress. The comment was so obviously unfair and inflammatory that even David Chen spoke up in Sarah's defense. That's not fair, Jake. Sarah hasn't been showing off or worrying about her appearance. She's been focused on the mission the whole time. Thompson turned on David with sudden anger. Are you seriously going to take her side? She's been undermining my leadership since minute 1, and now you're going to help her. I'm not taking anyone's side, David replied. I'm just saying that Sarah's suggestions have been good ones, and attacking her appearance doesn't make sense. Her appearance tells you everything you need to know about her priorities, Thompson shot back. Real soldiers don't waste money on expensive tattoos and fancy gear. They focus on their mission and their unit. Sarah had been listening to the argument with growing anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew that Thompson was trying to provoke her into a confrontation that would justify his hostility. My tattoo represents my family's military service, she said quietly. 3 generations of combat veterans, including my grandmother who served as a translator in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Maybe before you make assumptions about what my priorities are, you should consider that you might not know everything about my background." Thompson laughed harshly. "Right, I'm sure your rich family has a long tradition of buying their way into impressive military positions." The comment was so far from reality that Sarah almost laughed. Her family had struggled financially for most of her childhood, and every member who had served in the military had started at the bottom and earned their advancement through merit and sacrifice. But before she could respond, Marcus Williams stood up with an expression of disgust. "You know what, Jake? I've heard enough. Sarah's been nothing but professional and competent since we started this exercise. You're the one who's creating problems with this constant hostility. Maybe you should focus on being a better team leader instead of attacking people based on their appearance." Thompson's face went white with rage. "Don't you dare question my leadership abilities. I've been in combat zones while some people were getting their nails done and picking out tattoo designs." The accusation was so absurd and offensive that it finally pushed Sarah past her breaking point. "You want to know about combat experience?" she said, standing up and facing Thompson directly. "I spent 8 months in Afghanistan providing close air support coordination for infantry units. I called in airstrikes that saved American lives, and I did it while taking enemy fire. My unit received a Presidential Unit Citation for our performance under combat conditions. So before you make any more assumptions about my experience or my priorities, you might want to check your facts." Thompson stared at her for a moment, clearly surprised by the intensity of her response. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his hostility. "Anyone can make claims about their service record," he said, "especially someone who's obviously getting special treatment based on their connections or other factors." The implication was clear and deeply offensive. Sarah felt her hands clenching into fists, but she forced herself to maintain control. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting that some people get opportunities they don't earn through merit alone," Thompson replied. "And I'm suggesting that people who are more concerned with their image than their performance don't belong in elite units." David Chen stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate further. "This is getting out of hand. We need to focus on the mission, not on personal conflicts." Marcus Williams nodded in agreement. "David's right. We can sort this out after the exercise is over. Right now, we need to work together if we want to succeed." But Sarah could see that the damage had been done. Thompson's accusations had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of David and Marcus, even though they disagreed with his methods. She realized that no matter how well she performed, there would always be questions about whether she truly belonged among the elite soldiers at Fort Braxton. As they settled into their defensive position for the night, Sarah volunteered for the last watch, knowing that she would have trouble sleeping anyway. She spent the early morning hours staring into the forest, thinking about Thompson's words and wondering if coming to Fort Braxton had been a mistake. She had worked so hard to earn her place here, sacrificing personal relationships and financial security to pursue her military career. The idea that her achievements might be dismissed because of prejudice and assumption was deeply frustrating. But as the sun began to rise and her teammates began stirring, Sarah made a decision. She would continue to perform at the highest level, regardless of Thompson's hostility or anyone else's doubts. She owed it to herself, to her family's legacy, and to all the other soldiers who had faced similar challenges throughout military history. The tattoo on her arm was a reminder that she came from a tradition of warriors who had overcome prejudice and proven their worth through action rather than words. She would follow their example and let her performance speak for itself, no matter what obstacles she faced. The second day of the exercise brought new challenges that tested both their tactical skills and their ability to function as a team despite their personal conflicts. They made good progress toward their objective, but the tension between Sarah and Thompson continued to simmer beneath the surface. As they prepared for their final push toward the extraction point, Sarah knew that the real test was yet to come. The exercise was designed to place maximum stress on participants, and she had a feeling that the most difficult challenges lay ahead. The final day of the survival exercise dawned cold and misty, with visibility reduced to less than 50 meters in the dense mountain fog. Sarah's team had spent the night in a carefully concealed position just 3 kilometers from their extraction point, but intelligence gathered from radio intercepts suggested that opposing forces had concentrated their efforts in the exact area where they needed to go. Thompson had grown increasingly agitated as the exercise progressed, his leadership being challenged at every turn by Sarah's superior tactical knowledge and the team's growing recognition of her capabilities. The constant friction was affecting team performance, and all 4 members knew that their success or failure would depend on their ability to work together during the final push. "All right, here's the situation," Thompson said as they gathered around their map in the pre-dawn darkness. "We need to cover 3 clicks through enemy-controlled territory and reach the extraction point by 1400 hours. After that, we're officially captured." Sarah studied the topographic lines, noting several possible routes that offered different advantages and risks. "The direct route takes us through that saddle between the 2 peaks, but that's exactly where I'd set up an ambush if I were running the opposition forces." "Maybe that's where you'd set up an ambush," Thompson replied coldly, "but people with real combat experience might think differently." Marcus Williams had clearly reached his limit with Thompson's constant hostility toward Sarah. "Jake, for crying out loud, Sarah's tactical suggestions have been right every single time so far. Maybe we should listen to what she has to say before dismissing it." "I'm not dismissing anything," Thompson shot back. "I'm making command decisions based on my experience and judgment. If some people can't handle following orders, maybe they don't belong in special operations." David Chen looked nervously between Thompson and Sarah, clearly uncomfortable with the ongoing conflict, but uncertain how to address it. "Maybe we could look at all the options and vote on the best approach." "This isn't a democracy," Thompson snapped. "I'm the senior-ranking member of this team, which makes me the leader. We're going through the saddle because that's the fastest route, and speed is more important than elaborate tactical maneuvering." Sarah bit back her response, knowing that arguing with Thompson in front of the others would only make the situation worse. But as she looked at the map, she could see disaster written in the terrain features. The saddle was a natural funnel that would force them into a narrow passage with high ground on both sides, exactly the kind of terrain that opposing forces would want to control. They began moving before dawn, with Sarah again taking point despite Thompson's obvious reluctance to rely on her skills. The fog provided excellent concealment, but made navigation challenging, requiring constant reference to compass bearings and terrain features to maintain their heading. After an hour of careful movement, they reached the base of the ridge that led up to the saddle. Sarah signaled for the team to stop while she scouted ahead, moving silently through the underbrush to get a better view of the terrain. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Through breaks in the fog, she could make out at least 4 camouflaged positions overlooking the saddle, with interlocking fields of fire that would make passage impossible without detection. Even worse, she spotted movement in the trees that suggested roving patrols were actively covering the approaches. She made her way back to the team and reported her observations. "The saddle is heavily defended. I counted at least 4 fixed positions and multiple patrols. If we go that way, we'll be walking into a kill zone." Thompson studied the route through his binoculars, but the fog prevented him from seeing what Sarah had observed. "I don't see any definitive evidence of enemy positions. You might be seeing shadows and natural terrain features." "I know the difference between shadows and camouflaged fighting positions," Sarah replied firmly. "There's an entire squad up there waiting for us." "Maybe," Thompson conceded grudgingly. "But even if you're right, we don't have time to find another route. We'll have to take our chances and move fast." Marcus Williams shook his head in disbelief. "Jake, if Sarah says there are enemy positions up there, we need to find another way. Getting captured because we ignored good intelligence would be inexcusable." "Fine," Thompson said, his voice tight with anger. "What do you suggest, Martinez, since everyone seems to think you're the tactical genius?" Sarah had been studying the map while Thompson argued with the others, and she had identified an alternative route that would take longer but offered much better concealment. "We circle around to the east and approach the extraction point from the back side. It adds about 2 hours to our movement, but there's a creek bed that will give us concealment almost all the way to the objective." 2 hours we don't have," Thompson replied. "By the time we get there using your route, the exercise will be over." "Not if we move fast and don't waste time arguing," Sarah said. "The creek bed will let us move quickly without worrying about visual concealment." David Chen looked at his watch nervously. We need to make a decision. Every minute we spend here reduces our chances of success. Thompson stared at Sarah for a long moment, his jaw working with suppressed anger. She could see him weighing his options, acknowledge her superior tactical judgment and follow her suggestion, or stick with his original plan and risk the entire mission. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try your route, but if we don't make it to the extraction point in time, the failure is on you." They spent precious minutes adjusting their route and redistributing their gear for the faster pace that would be required. Sarah took point again, leading them through the forest toward the creek bed she had identified on the map. The terrain was more challenging than the direct route, requiring them to navigate steep slopes and dense undergrowth. But Sarah's choice proved sound. The creek bed provided excellent concealment and allowed them to move at nearly double their previous speed. As they made their way downstream, Sarah couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere within the team had shifted. Marcus and David were following her navigation choices without question, while Thompson trailed behind with obvious reluctance. After an hour of rapid movement through the creek bed, they reached a point where they could observe the extraction point from concealment. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by forest, with several buildings that had been constructed for training purposes. Sarah glassed the area carefully with her binoculars, looking for signs of opposing forces or other teams that might have already reached the objective. The area appeared quiet, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving in this type of exercise. "I don't see any obvious enemy presence," she reported quietly, "but there are plenty of places where they could be concealed." Thompson took his turn with the binoculars, studying the landing zone with obvious skepticism. "Looks clear to me. We should move in and secure the area." "Hold on," Sarah said, continuing to scan the tree lines around the clearing. "Something doesn't feel right. This has been too easy." As if in response to her words, the sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the valley. All 4 team members looked up, trying to locate the source of the noise through the forest canopy. "That could be our extraction," David said hopefully. "Or it could be opposing forces being repositioned," Sarah replied, still scanning the area around the landing zone. "We need to be careful about how we approach this." Suddenly, she saw what had been bothering her. A small reflection from the tree line across the clearing, probably a scope or binoculars catching the light for just a moment. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the spot where she had seen the reflection. "Enemy observation post at 11 o'clock, about 200 meters into the tree line." Thompson followed her direction with the binoculars, searching for several seconds before finally spotting what she had seen. His expression showed a mixture of grudging respect and continued resentment. "Good eyes," he admitted, "but we still need to get to that landing zone. How do you suggest we do it without being detected?" Sarah had been thinking about exactly that problem. "We circle around to the south and approach from the blind spot behind those buildings. It'll take us about 30 minutes, but we'll avoid the observation post entirely." 30 minutes we might not have," Thompson replied, checking his watch. "If that helicopter is our extraction, we need to be in position when it arrives." But even as he spoke, the sound of the helicopter was fading into the distance, suggesting it had been either opposing forces or another team's extraction. Their window was still open. They spent the next half hour carefully maneuvering into position, using Sarah's route to approach the landing zone from an unexpected direction. Her tactical judgment proved correct again. They were able to reach the edge of the clearing without being detected by the enemy observation post. As they prepared for their final approach to the extraction point, Thompson gathered the team for a brief conference. "Once we break from the tree line, we'll be exposed," he said. "We need to move fast and get to that central building where we can establish communication with our extraction team." Sarah nodded in agreement, but she was still studying the area around the buildings. Something about the setup continued to bother her, though she couldn't identify exactly what it was. "Marcus, you and David provide overwatch from the tree line," Thompson continued. "Sarah and I will move to the building and establish contact." It was the first time during the entire exercise that Thompson had acknowledged Sarah as a capable partner, rather than treating her as a liability. She wondered if the stress of the situation had finally forced him to put aside his personal prejudices in favor of mission accomplishment. They synchronized their watches and prepared to move. Sarah checked her weapon and adjusted her gear, making sure everything was secure for the final sprint to the objective. "Ready?" Thompson asked, looking at her with an expression that was neutral rather than hostile for the first time in days. "Ready," Sarah confirmed. They burst from the tree line and sprinted across the open ground toward the central building. Sarah's conditioning served her well. She reached the building several steps ahead of Thompson and immediately moved to secure the entrance while he established communication with their extraction team. But as they approached the building, Sarah's tactical instincts finally identified what had been bothering her about the setup. The building was too perfect, too obviously the place where anyone would go to establish communication and wait for extraction. "Jake, wait," she said urgently as Thompson reached for the door handle. "What now?" he replied with exasperation. "This feels like a trap. Why would they make the objective so obvious? If I were running the opposition, this is exactly where I'd set up a capture scenario." Thompson paused, his hand still on the door handle. For a moment, Sarah thought he might actually consider her warning, but then his face hardened with familiar stubbornness. "You've been paranoid about everything since we started this exercise," he said. "Sometimes the obvious approach is the right approach. We're going in." He opened the door and stepped inside, with Sarah reluctantly following behind him. The interior of the building was set up as a communications center, with radio equipment and computers that they could use to contact their extraction team. Thompson immediately moved to the radio and began transmitting their location and status. Sarah positioned herself near the door, maintaining security and trying to shake her feeling of unease. The response from their extraction team was immediate and positive. A helicopter would be dispatched to pick them up within 15 minutes. Thompson allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction as he completed the communication protocol. But Sarah's attention was focused on sounds from outside the building, the subtle noise of movement that suggested they were no longer alone in the area. "Jake," she whispered urgently, "we've got movement outside." Thompson looked up from the radio with irritation. "Of course we have movement outside. Marcus and David are providing overwatch, remember." "This is different," Sarah insisted. "There are too many people moving, and they're not staying in overwatch positions." Before Thompson could respond, the building was suddenly flooded with smoke as grenades were thrown through the windows. Opposing forces stormed through multiple entrances simultaneously, shouting commands and pointing weapons at the stunned trainees. "Exercise complete," shouted the lead instructor as the smoke began to clear. "You are now prisoners of war." Thompson stared in shock as zip ties were placed on his wrists, clearly unable to believe that they had been captured so close to successful extraction. Sarah submitted to the same treatment, but her expression was more resigned than surprised. As they were led outside, she could see Marcus and David being escorted from their overwatch positions by additional opposing forces. The entire capture had been carefully orchestrated and flawlessly executed. "I tried to warn you," Sarah said quietly as they were loaded into a transport vehicle. Thompson's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You always have to be right, don't you?" he snapped. "Even when we're captured, you still have to make it about your superior judgment." "I'm not trying to make it about anything," Sarah replied. "I'm just pointing out that listening to warnings might have prevented this." The transport vehicle drove them to a detention facility, where they would undergo the final phase of the exercise resistance training, designed to test their ability to maintain operational security under interrogation. But as they sat in the back of the truck, Sarah could see that Thompson's resentment toward her had reached a new level. Being proven wrong so dramatically in front of the entire team had pushed him past rational hostility into something more dangerous. The resistance training facility was designed to simulate a realistic prisoner of war environment, with individual cells, interrogation rooms, and common areas where prisoners could interact under guard supervision. The exercise would last 48 hours and would test their ability to resist interrogation while maintaining unit cohesion. Sarah was separated from her teammates and placed in solitary confinement for the first 12 hours, a standard technique designed to create anxiety and uncertainty. The cell was small and windowless, with only a concrete bench and basic sanitation facilities. During this isolation period, she had time to reflect on the events of the past few days. Despite Thompson's hostility and the team's capture, She felt proud of her performance during the exercise. Her tactical decisions had been sound, her warnings had been accurate, and she had maintained her professionalism even under extreme stress. When she was finally moved to the common area with other prisoners, Sarah was surprised to find that several members of her cohort were present, including Maria Santos and Lisa Johnson. Apparently, multiple teams had been captured during their extraction attempts. "How did your exercise go?" Maria asked quietly as they sat together at one of the metal tables. "Mixed results," Sarah replied carefully, aware that their conversations were probably being monitored. "Good tactical performance, but some leadership challenges." Maria nodded knowingly. "Thompson." Among other things. They were interrupted by the arrival of new prisoners, including Thompson himself. He entered the common area with his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face still showing the anger and frustration that had been building throughout the exercise. When he spotted Sarah sitting with Maria, his expression darkened further. She could see him processing the situation, looking for someone to blame for his failure during the exercise, and settling on the obvious target. The guards removed Thompson's restraints and directed him to sit at a different table, but Sarah could feel his hostile gaze following her movements around the room. She knew that the real confrontation was still coming, and that Thompson's pride had been wounded badly enough that he might do something reckless. As the hours passed in the detention facility, Sarah noticed that several other members of her cohort seemed to be avoiding her. Word of the conflict within her team had apparently spread, and Thompson's version of events was painting her as an insubordinate soldier who had undermined team unity. The irony was bitter. Her superior performance and tactical judgment were being used as evidence against her character, while Thompson's poor leadership and stubborn decision-making were being overlooked. Sarah realized that the events of the past few days had created a crisis that extended far beyond the survival exercise. Her place at Fort Braxton was now in question, not because of her performance, but because of the politics and prejudice that Thompson had successfully weaponized against her. As she prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead in the resistance training, Sarah knew that she was fighting for more than just her military career. She was fighting for the principle that merit and performance should matter more than assumptions and prejudice. The cherry blossoms and military insignia of her tattoo seemed to pulse with meaning as she thought about her grandmother's stories of discrimination and perseverance. 3 generations of her family had faced similar challenges, and each had found a way to overcome them through dedication and courage. Sarah was determined to continue that legacy, regardless of what Thompson or anyone else tried to do to undermine her. The real test of her character was just beginning. The resistance training portion of the exercise intensified during the second day, with individual interrogations designed to test each prisoner's ability to maintain operational security under psychological pressure. Sarah found herself in a sterile white room facing a skilled interrogator who had clearly been briefed on her background and the conflicts within her team. "Sergeant Martinez," the interrogator began, consulting a thick file folder, "your teammates have been very forthcoming about your role in the mission's failure. According to their statements, you consistently undermined legitimate authority and put personal ambition ahead of unit cohesion." Sarah kept her expression neutral, recognizing the interrogation technique being used. "I'm required to provide only my name, rank, and serial number." "Of course, that's your right," the interrogator replied smoothly. "But I think you'll find it beneficial to discuss the leadership problems that led to your capture. After all, your superiors will want to understand what went wrong." The interrogator opened the file and began reading from what appeared to be official statements. "Staff Sergeant Thompson reports that you repeatedly questioned his authority, made unauthorized tactical decisions, and created discord within the team through insubordinate behavior." Sarah remained silent, but internally she was analyzing the situation. The interrogator's knowledge of specific details suggested that someone from her team had indeed provided extensive information about their internal conflicts. "Corporal Chen corroborates these observations," the interrogator continued, noting that your constant challenges to established authority created an atmosphere of uncertainty and conflict that ultimately compromised the mission. The mention of David Chen's apparent betrayal stung more than Sarah had expected. She had thought Chen was beginning to see through Thompson's prejudice and recognize her contributions to the team's success. Even Sergeant Williams, who initially supported your tactical suggestions, has expressed concerns about your inability to function within a proper command structure. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the extent to which her teammates had apparently turned against her. The interrogator was either reading from genuine statements or was extremely skilled at creating convincing fabrications. "The interesting thing," the interrogator said, leaning back in his chair, "is that your personnel file tells a very different story. Outstanding performance reviews, commendations for tactical excellence, and glowing recommendations from previous commanders. It's almost as if there are two different people here." He paused for effect, studying Sarah's face for any reaction. "Unless, of course, your previous evaluations were influenced by factors other than pure merit. Your file mentions that you come from a military family with significant connections. Perhaps that explains the discrepancy between your documented performance and your actual capabilities in the field." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The suggestion that her achievements had been handed to her because of family connections was not only false, but deeply insulting to everything she had worked to accomplish. "Your tattoo is quite distinctive," the interrogator continued, apparently changing subjects. "Expensive work, very artistic, must have cost several $1,000s to have done properly." Sarah forced herself to remain silent, though every instinct urged her to defend herself and correct the false assumptions being thrown at her. "I've spoken with soldiers who grew up in real poverty, and they tell me that spending money on decorative tattoos would never occur to them when that money could be used for family needs or education. Your priorities suggest someone who has always had financial security." The interrogator stood up and walked around to Sarah's side of the table. "Here's what I think happened during your exercise, Sergeant Martinez. I think you're accustomed to getting your way through connections and influence, and when faced with legitimate military authority, you didn't know how to accept orders and follow proper procedures." He returned to his seat and opened another section of the file folder. "Your teammates describe someone who was more concerned with being right than being effective. Someone who couldn't accept that experienced soldiers might know better than she did. Someone whose ego was more important than mission success." Sarah bit her tongue to keep from responding, but the effort was becoming increasingly difficult. Every accusation was not only wrong, but represented a complete inversion of what had actually happened during the exercise. "The real tragedy," the interrogator said with apparent sympathy, "is that your behavior affected other members of your team. Sergeant Williams reports feeling caught between conflicting authorities, while Corporal Chen describes a growing sense that the team was falling apart due to your inability to subordinate yourself to proper command structure." The interrogation continued for another hour, with the interrogator using increasingly sophisticated psychological techniques to try to break down Sarah's resistance. But despite the personal nature of the attacks, she maintained her silence and refused to provide any information beyond her basic identification. When she was finally returned to the common area, Sarah felt emotionally drained but proud of her performance during the interrogation. She had maintained operational security despite intense pressure and personal attacks. However, the atmosphere in the common area had clearly shifted since her absence. Several members of her cohort were avoiding eye contact, while others looked at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to open hostility. Thompson was sitting at the central table, holding court with a group that included David Chen, Marcus Williams, and several trainees from other teams. As Sarah entered the room, their conversation stopped abruptly. "Well, if it isn't our tactical genius," Thompson said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "How did your interrogation go? Did you manage to maintain the same high standards of performance you showed during the exercise?" Sarah ignored the provocation and moved toward an empty table in the corner, but Thompson wasn't finished. "I heard you had some interesting things to say about team dynamics and command authority," he continued. "I'm sure the interrogators found your perspective very enlightening." Maria Santos, who had been sitting quietly near the back of the room, stood up and approached Sarah's table. "How are you holding up?" she asked in a low voice. "I'm fine," Sarah replied. "Just looking forward to getting this over with." "Thompson's been telling everyone that you broke during your interrogation," Maria whispered. "He's claiming that you admitted to undermining the team and blamed him for the mission's failure." Sarah felt a flash of anger. That's completely false. I didn't say anything beyond name, rank, and serial number. I figured as much, Maria said. But he's got a lot of people convinced. Some of them are starting to believe that you really were the problem during the exercise. Before Sarah could respond, one of the guards approached their table. Martinez, you're needed for a follow-up session. Sarah was escorted back to the interrogation room, where she found the same interrogator waiting with additional documentation. I'm afraid we've discovered some inconsistencies in your story, he began without preamble. Or rather, inconsistencies between your silence and the detailed accounts provided by your teammates. He opened a new file folder and began reading from what appeared to be transcripts. According to Staff Sergeant Thompson's statement, you admitted during your previous session that you had been trying to undermine his authority from the beginning of the exercise. You apparently told our colleagues that your superior tactical knowledge entitled you to challenge his command decisions. Sarah stared at the interrogator in shock. The statement was not only false, but represented exactly the opposite of what she had actually done during her interrogation. Corporal Chen's account corroborates this version of events, the interrogator continued. He reports that you expressed regret for allowing your ego to interfere with proper military procedures. The fabrication was so elaborate and detailed that Sarah began to wonder if she was losing her mind. Had she actually said something during her interrogation that could be interpreted this way? Had the stress and fatigue affected her memory? The most interesting revelation, the interrogator said, comes from Sergeant Williams. He reports that you made specific comments about your family's military connections and your expectation that these connections would protect you from consequences for your behavior. Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had never made any such statements, but the accumulation of false accusations was beginning to have a psychological effect. She found herself questioning her own recollection of events. Here's what I think is happening, Sergeant Martinez, the interrogator said in a tone of false concern. I think you're experiencing some form of stress-induced memory loss. The pressure of the exercise, combined with the realization that your behavior had damaged your team's cohesion, may have caused you to suppress your recollection of what you told us. He leaned forward across the table, his expression showing apparent sympathy. This kind of psychological response is not uncommon in high-stress situations. Military personnel sometimes develop selective amnesia about events that reflect poorly on their performance or character. Sarah forced herself to think clearly through the confusion and doubt that the interrogator was trying to create. She knew exactly what had happened during her previous session, and she knew that the statements being attributed to her were completely fabricated. The realization hit her like a cold shock. This was part of the resistance training exercise. The interrogators were using false information provided by her teammates to create psychological pressure and test her ability to maintain her version of events under extreme stress. But the sophistication of the deception suggested that her teammates had indeed provided detailed information about the conflicts within their team. The interrogators were using real interpersonal dynamics to construct false confessions that would be psychologically devastating if she believed them. I understand your confusion, the interrogator continued, apparently interpreting her silence as uncertainty. It's natural to want to deny statements that reflect poorly on your character, but multiple witnesses have confirmed your admissions, and we have detailed records of everything you told us. Sarah realized that she was facing a test that went beyond simple resistance to interrogation. She was being challenged to maintain her integrity and self-knowledge in the face of a coordinated effort to convince her that her own memories and perceptions were false. The cherry blossoms on her tattoo seemed to burn against her skin as she thought about her grandmother's stories of facing similar challenges during World War II. Keiko Martinez had been questioned repeatedly by military intelligence officers who suspected Japanese Americans of divided loyalties, and she had maintained her dignity and truthfulness despite intense pressure. I provided only my name, rank, and serial number during my previous interrogation, Sarah said clearly. Any statements attributed to me beyond that basic information are false. The interrogator's expression showed surprise at her firm response. Sergeant Martinez, I understand that this is difficult to accept, but we have multiple corroborating sources. Your own teammates have confirmed the substance of your admissions. Then my teammates are either lying or being lied to, Sarah replied. I know what I said and what I didn't say. I will not be convinced otherwise, regardless of what fabricated evidence you present. The interrogator studied her for several seconds, apparently reassessing his approach. You're suggesting that we would fabricate evidence and coordinate false testimony from multiple sources. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah said. I'm simply stating that I know the truth of my own actions, and I will not be manipulated into doubting that truth. For the first time during either interrogation session, the interrogator appeared genuinely impressed by her response. He made some notes in his file, then looked at her with what might have been respect. Very well, Sergeant Martinez. We'll conclude this session here. As Sarah was escorted back to the common area, she felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since the beginning of the exercise. She understood now that the entire situation had been designed to test not just her resistance to interrogation, but her ability to maintain her sense of self and truth under extreme psychological pressure. But she also realized that the exercise had revealed something important about the dynamics within her training cohort. Whether Thompson and the others had intentionally provided information to create this scenario, or whether they had simply been manipulated into revealing their true feelings about her, the result was the same. Her place at Fort Braxton was in serious jeopardy, not because of her performance, but because of the personal animosity and prejudice that,